Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stood in a dark room and truly felt that something was looking back at you? Not a person, not an animal, something older than either. Something that exists the way weather exists or gravity. Not through intention exactly, but through presence, through the simple, overwhelming fact of being there. That feeling is what Bloodborne is built on. Not the beasts, not the blood. The feeling that you are being watched from above, from below, from angles that don't have names in any human language. Tonight, we are going to meet the things that are watching. Find yourself somewhere comfortable. Let your body settle. The weight of the day belongs to another world now. A sunlit world with clocks and calendars and things that make sense. Let that world recede. Let it go quiet. We are going to walk the streets of Yharnam one more time. But this time we are not hunting beasts. This time we are looking up and sideways and inward at the beings that human minds were never supposed to fully comprehend. These are the Great Ones, and tonight I am going to tell you everything we know about them. Everything. Take a slow breath. Close your eyes if you like. The gaslit streets are waiting. The blood moon is hanging low on the horizon, swollen and red and impossibly close. Let's begin. Before we meet each of them individually, we need to understand what the Great Ones are, and perhaps more importantly, what they are not. They are not gods in any sense we would recognize. A god, in most human traditions, is something that can be prayed to, something that hears you, considers your request, and responds in ways that reflect some understanding of what you need. The Great Ones do not work this way. They exist on planes of reality so far removed from human experience that the question of whether they hear our prayers is almost meaningless, like asking whether the ocean hears the rain. And yet they are not entirely indifferent. This is where Bloodborne's portrait of them becomes genuinely complex, genuinely unsettling, and genuinely sad. The Great Ones feel things, they want things, they grieve. The thread that runs through every single one of them, the one truth that unites all of their stories, is this. Every Great One loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. Read that again. Let it settle. Every Great One loses its child. This is the engine beneath everything that happens in Bloodborne. The healing church, the hunter's dream, the scourge of beasts, the nightmare realms. All of it flows from this single aching fact. These cosmic entities, so vast and terrible that a glimpse of them can shatter a human mind, are grief-stricken parents. They are beings of unimaginable power who cannot hold on to the thing they most desire. There is something in that which resists the comfort of easy horror. It would be simpler if the Great Ones were simply evil, simply hungry, simply predatory. They are not. They are something harder to classify. They are alien, yes, and dangerous and incomprehensible. But underneath all of that, they are bereaved. The scholars of Byrgenwerth understood pieces of this. Lawrence and the Healing Church understood other pieces. Mikolash and the School of Mensis thought they understood and were destroyed by the gap between what they believed and what was true. And the player, the good hunter, makes their way through the entire terrible architecture of this world, gathering fragments, item descriptions, environmental details, cryptic dialogue, until the shape of the truth begins to emerge. Tonight, we are going to look at that truth clearly. we are going to examine each of the Great Ones, their nature, their history, their relationship to Yharnam and to humanity, their losses and their longings, and we are going to hold all of it together until the picture becomes whole. Some of what we know is certain. Some is the most credible interpretation of deeply ambiguous evidence. When we step into speculation, I will tell you, this is lore, not scripture, and Bloodborne has always honoured the mystery at its heart too much to answer every question plainly. That mystery is part of the gift. One more thing before we begin. There is a reason this exploration of the Great Ones is different from a simple boss guide or a list of stats and weaknesses. The Great Ones, if you engage with them only on the surface, only as obstacles, only as bosses to defeat on the way to the next checkpoint, give you almost nothing. They are large and alien and terrifying, and then they are dead. But if you slow down, if you read the item descriptions and sit with the architecture of the spaces they inhabit, and listen to the music that plays while you fight them, each boss in Bloodborne has a unique musical theme that is doing enormous narrative work. And if you bring all of those things together with everything else the game tells you, the Great Ones become something else entirely. They become the heart of the game. They become the reason everything else in Yharnam happened. And they become genuinely, unexpectedly moving in ways that are difficult to explain to someone who has not experienced them. That is what we are trying to reach tonight. Not just information, but feeling. Not just knowledge, but something closer to insight. We have a long way to go, and the night is generous with its time. Now, let us meet them, one by one, in the dark. Let's begin with the most present and the most absent of all the Great Ones, because that contradiction sits at the heart of what makes him so important. Oedon has no physical form. This is not a philosophical statement, it is a literal description of his existence. Where other Great Ones occupy bodies, enormous, alien, beautiful and horrifying bodies, Oedon exists only as a voice, only as essence. He has transcended the need for physical presence so completely that he cannot be seen, cannot be directly encountered, and cannot be meaningfully perceived by human senses at any level of insight. You can spend the entire game growing in cosmic awareness, peeling back layer after layer of hidden reality, and you will never once lay eyes on Oedon. He is simply there, threaded through everything, present in a way that has nothing to do with location. One of the Carol runes named after him, the Formless Oedon rune, tells us directly, the Great One Oedon, lacking form, exists only in voice, and is symbolized by this rune. Both Oedon and his inadvertent worshippers surreptitiously seek the precious blood. That word inadvertent is doing enormous work in that sentence. Inadvertent worshippers. People who worship Oedon without knowing they are worshipping Oedon. People who seek blood, who receive blood ministration, who give blood, who spill blood in the hunt, and through that very act of engaging with blood, are engaging with Oedon himself. Because blood is Oedon's essence. Blood is the medium through which he exists in the physical world. The healing properties of the old blood, the transformative power that the healing church discovered and built their entire institution upon, all of that flows from Oedon. The city of Yharnam, in some profound and terrible sense, was built in worship of a god its founders did not know they were worshipping. Think about what that means for a moment. Every blood ministration administered in that grand cathedral ward, every hunter who drank beast blood to strengthen themselves, every citizen who accepted treatment in the healing church's clinics, every act of blood exchange in Yharnam's long history, down to the streets soaked in the fluid during every night of the hunt. All of it was inadvertently an act of devotion to the formless Great One who exists within blood itself. The name Oedon is thought by some lore scholars to derive from the Norse All-Father Odin, a god associated with wisdom, sacrifice, and the fundamental ordering of reality. Odin hung himself from the world tree to gain knowledge of the runes. He sacrificed one of his eyes for a drink from the well of cosmic wisdom. There is something in that self-wounding, in pursuit of understanding, that rhymes with Bloodborne's central obsession with eyes, with insight, with the price of seeing clearly. Others draw a connection to the Greek king Oedipus, who famously blinded himself after learning a truth he could not bear, and whose name is the root of the medical term Oedipism, meaning self-inflicted removal of the eye. The worshippers of Oedon in Yharnam are often depicted blindfolded. Is this because they have sought and received a kind of insight that no longer requires physical sight? Or because they are deliberately blinding themselves to the truth of what they worship? The game does not say. The ambiguity is the point. But Oedon does act in the world, even without form. He acts through blood. He acts through desire. He acts through the fundamental cosmic drive that all the Great Ones share, the desire for offspring. Oedon is the only Great One we know of who directly conceived children with mortals. Multiple times. His most significant union was with Queen Yharnam, the ancient Thumerian ruler whose civilization predates Yharnam, as we know it, by thousands of years. Their child was Mergo, an infant Great One of staggering significance, who we will meet later. But Oedon did not stop there. During the night of the hunt depicted in the game, as the blood moon rises and the barrier between worlds thins, Oedon acts again. Arianna, a woman of aristocratic blood connected to the Cainhurst Vile bloods, becomes pregnant. The impostor Yosefka, who has taken over the real doctor's clinic, also shows signs of Oedon's attention. In each case, the union between Oedon and a mortal woman produces something that cannot survive in human terms. The children are cosmic. The pregnancies are violations of the natural order, and each of them produces a fragment of the umbilical cord that the good hunter can collect, carrying within it a sliver of Great One essence. There is something quietly devastating about Oedon's situation. He is perhaps the most powerful of all the Great Ones, so transcendent he no longer requires physical form, and yet he cannot hold on to his children. He loses them. He yearns, and in that yearning he reaches across the membrane between his existence and ours, touching women in the night of the blood moon, hoping to create something that will last. He never asks permission, whether this is because he is incapable of understanding consent in human terms, or because the needs of a Great One simply do not operate within such frameworks, or because Oedon is genuinely indifferent to the women he affects. The game does not answer this directly. But it is one of the aspects of the Great Ones that is genuinely difficult to look at with uncomplicated sympathy. Their longing is real. Their methods are alien and often terrible. There is a theory among serious Bloodborne lore scholars that Oedon and the moon presence may be the same entity, or deeply related, that the formless nature of Oedon and the shadowy architecture of the hunter's dream might share a common author. We will examine that more carefully when we reach the moon presence. For now, know only this. of all the Great Ones, Oedon is the one who touches every life in Yharnam and leaves the deepest fingerprints on the entire history of the game world. He does so invisibly, without a face, without a body, without a single moment in which you can look at him and say, "There you are." He is the god of blood in a world that has drowned in it, and he never shows his face. Let us look at the specific places in the game where Oedon's presence is most clearly felt, because they tell us something important about the shape of his influence. There is a place in Yharnam called Oedon Chapel. It stands in the cathedral ward, a modest structure compared to the grand cathedral looming behind it, but significant in ways that only become clear with time. The chapel is managed by a figure known as the Chapel Dweller, a large, gentle, apparently devout man who guides survivors of the hunt to safety within the chapel's walls. He is devoted, he is kind. He serves, with quiet sincerity, a god he almost certainly does not understand. The name Oedon Chapel suggests that this building was specifically consecrated to the Formless Great One, not to the Healing Church's broader communion with the Great Ones, not to the blood ministration system and all its institutional weight, specifically, quietly, to Oedon. And the chapel serves throughout the game as a refuge, a place where broken and frightened NPCs can be sent, where they gather in the relative safety of a sacred space while the hunt rages outside. It is worth pausing on the quiet irony of this, the safest place in Yharnam, the place that functions as a literal sanctuary, is consecrated to the Great One whose inadvertent worship includes every act of bloodshed in the city's history. The refuge is named for the god of the blood that created the catastrophe everyone is sheltering from. This is either a coincidence so deep it stops being a coincidence, or a deliberate comment on the nature of the city's relationship with the forces that shaped it. Now consider what happens to the women who end up in the chapel. Ariana. Woman of obvious aristocratic bearing, her clothing, her manner, her particular shade of blood, is connected to Cainhurst, to the vile bloodline, to a heritage that carries old blood through her veins in a specific and concentrated way. If you guide her to Oedon Chapel and return as the game progresses, she becomes pregnant. She gives birth, in the sewers beneath the chapel, to something cosmic. Something that is not a human child. She dies in the process, or near enough to it. You find her at the end, pale and empty, the life drained from her. The imposter Yosefka, who has seized the clinic on the other side of Yharnam, undergoes a similar change. She experiments on herself and on others, trying to achieve transcendence. And Oedon reaches her too in the blood moon's rising. She's also pregnant. She also gives birth to something that carries a fragment of umbilical cord within it. What Oedon is doing in these cases is not, I think, cruelty for its own sake. The Great Ones do not operate through cruelty in the way that humans do, with intention, with the desire to cause suffering. What Oedon is doing is simpler and stranger, and in some ways more terrible. He is trying again. He is trying, as he has always tried, as all Great Ones try, to create something that will persist. He is reaching toward the women of Yharnam the way he reached toward Queen Yharnam thousands of years before, with the same formless urgency and the same inevitable outcome. The children cannot survive, or rather, they can survive in forms that are no longer human children. The product of Ariana's suffering is a cosmic thing in the sewer. The product of Yosefka's experiments is a celestial embryo of some kind. They are not nothing. They are Great One offspring carrying the essence of their father, but they are not what Oedon wants. They are not Mergo. They are not the child he lost. There is a rune, the Oedon Wraith rune, that causes enemies to release quicksilver, bullets when struck, representing the presence of blood in the physical world responding to Oedon's name. Quicksilver bullets are the ammunition of the hunter's trick weapons, the fuel that powers arcane attacks. The link between Oedon's name, blood, and the physical mechanics of the hunt is direct and intentional. Every time you fire a bullet in Yharnam, you are participating at some level in Oedon's economy of blood. And then there is the chapel dweller himself, that large, simple, devout man, tending to his refuge and his god. He never betrays you. He never turns hostile. In a city full of things that will eventually try to kill you, he is simply there, at the door, welcoming whoever arrives. He is Oedon's most faithful worshipper, and he does not know it. He was never told. He was given a chapel and a purpose and a god's name on the door, and he has served them all faithfully through the entire night of the hunt. If Oedon has a devotee who comes closest to what he might actually want from a relationship with humanity, not sacrifice, not power, not blood for its own sake, but simple, uncomplicated, ongoing presence, it might be this man in the doorway of the small chapel, offering shelter, keeping the light on, tending to a space that was built for something he cannot see. He is the god of blood in a world that has drowned in it, and in the one small building where his name is spoken with something like love, there is still a light in the window, still a door open to whoever makes it through the dark. If Oedon is the most intangible of the Great Ones, Ebrietas is the most present, the most physically accessible, the most, in some strange sense, human, not in her form, which is vast and alien and beautiful in the way that deep-sea creatures are beautiful, all pale mass and dark tentacles, and the slow pulse of something utterly other, but in her emotional state. When you first find Ebrietas, she is not waiting for you. She is not watching the door. She is not positioned to receive visitors with the composed authority of something divine. She is kneeling at the altar of despair in the deepest reaches of the upper cathedral ward, mourning. At her feet is the body of a creature resembling Rom, the great spider. Whether this is actually Rom, or another being of similar nature, or some earlier form of a Great One, remains genuinely ambiguous. What is not ambiguous is what Ebrietas is doing, grieving. She's alone, in the dark, at the bottom of the world, weeping in whatever way a being of her nature weeps. She does not move when you enter. She does not acknowledge you. She's so deep in her sorrow that a hunter entering the most sacred chamber of the healing church barely registers to her. It is only when you attack, when you initiate violence against something that was not paying attention to you, that she responds. Her title, Daughter of the Cosmos, tells us something about her origins. She comes from the land of Is, a plane deep within the chalice dungeon labyrinth that lies, according to the choir, in contact with the cosmos itself. The Great Ones who dwelt in Isses could access transcendental planes of thought, could think thoughts too large for conventional reality, perceive truths too complex for the physical world to contain. Ebrietas was one of them, but then something happened. The other Great Ones left. They departed. For where and why, and under what circumstances, the game never tells us, and Ebrietas did not go with them. Whether she was left behind deliberately or simply missed, or chose to stay for reasons of her own, is one of Bloodborne's most elegant mysteries. She is referred to in at least one source as the left-behind Great One, the Abandoned One. These are descriptions that carry enormous weight, because they tell us she knows she was left. She's aware of the absence. The scholars of Byrgenwerth found her first, deep in the labyrinth. This initial contact, a partially successful summoning using phantasm slugs, creatures that serve as augurs of the Great Ones, marked the beginning of what would become the Healing Church's most sacred relationship. The choir, the elite inner circle of the Church's scholarly wing, built their entire purpose around communion with Ebrietas. They recovered the Great Is Chalice, the key to reaching the land of Is and having direct audience with her, and used it to establish the connection that would define their work for decades. Here is where Ebrietas' situation becomes genuinely moving if you let yourself feel it. When the choir found her and told her they were seeking the Great Ones, she wanted to help them, because she was seeking the Great Ones too. She and the choir were, in a profound and unexpected way, allies in the same grief. Both were searching for something that had left without them. They worked together. Ebrietas shared her knowledge. She allowed the choir to channel her power. The choir built weapons and tools infused with her cosmic energy. The augur of Ebrietas, which allows the user to tear open a rift to Is and drag Ebrietas' tentacles through it. A call beyond, which channels the arcane force of a dying star. These were gifts of communion, evidence of a relationship that was, at least at first, genuinely collaborative. The choir used what they learned from Ebrietas in their experiments on the orphans of Yharnam. They exposed children to fragments of her essence, trying to catalyze the kind of transcendence they saw in Ebrietas herself. Most of the children died. The survivors became celestial emissaries, pale, bulbous-headed, other-dimensional beings that wander the upper cathedral ward to this day. There is a theory that the choir created these emissaries partly to give Ebrietas surrogate children, to address the grief that drives all Great Ones. The celestial emissaries do resemble Ebrietas in some ways, sharing her pale coloration and alien aspect. It did not help. Nothing can replace what was lost. Ebrietas remains at the altar of despair when you find her. The choir is gone. Their grand project of seeking the other Great Ones never came to fruition. The children they experimented on are scattered across the empty halls of the upper cathedral ward, and Ebrietas kneels in the dark beside the body of a being she appears to have cared for, alone. In purely physical terms, Ebrietas is formidable. Her body is immense, a mass of tentacles, a pair of dark skeletal wings, a face that is all swelling flesh and alien eyes, and she fights with the fury of something disturbed mid-grief, lunging and sweeping and calling down arcane light like the cold fire of distant stars. She's one of the hardest fights in the game for players who find her. Her arcane attacks have a range that seems to defy the physics of the space she occupies. She is, in combat, exactly what you would expect from a Great One disturbed from mourning. Overwhelming, desperate, not entirely controlled. But what lingers after is not the fight. It is the image of her as you first found her, kneeling, still, grieving in the dark at the bottom of the world's grandest cathedral, in a room that was built to honor her, surrounded by evidence of everything she gave to the people who claimed to serve her. She's the only Great One, scholars note, who appears to genuinely want to coexist with humanity. The others are indifferent, or operating on agendas too alien to pass as either benevolent or malevolent. Ebrietas reached out. She shared. She grieved alongside the people who found her, and in the end she was still alone. Let us sit with the specifics of what was built around her, because they matter. The choir occupied the upper cathedral ward, a district sealed off from the rest of Yharnam, requiring a special key to access, guarded and hidden in a way that suggests the church understood exactly how dangerous their work there was. The grand architecture of the upper cathedral ward reaches toward the sky, in the way Gothic cathedrals always do, as if the building itself is an argument, a physical insistence that the distance between humanity and heaven is not as great as it looks. The Lumen Flower Gardens, a greenhouse-like space within the ward where bioluminescent plants bloom in permanent twilight, were cultivated as a space of meditation and communion. The flowers glow with the blue-white light that echoes the colour of Ebrietas herself, of the arcane energy she channels, of the stars that the cosmos section of the Chalice Labyrinths lies open to. The Lumen Flower Gardens contain a series of statues, and the statues are important. They depict a figure, slender, reaching upward, in an attitude of supplication or transcendence. The same figure appears in the nightmare version of the space. There are theories that these statues represent the moon presence, or an idealized form of what the choir hoped to become, or simply the aspiration toward the cosmos that defined their work. Whatever they depict, they stand in the gardens that were cultivated in Ebrietas' honour, in the soft light of bioluminescent flowers, beneath the glass ceiling through which the stars are theoretically visible on clear nights. This is where the choir came to think, to commune, to practice the rituals of reaching towards something greater than themselves, guided by a great one who was doing exactly the same thing. The weapons and tools the choir developed through their communion with Ebrietas deserve more attention than they usually receive, because they tell us something specific about what she shared with them. The Augur of Ebrietas is a carol rune that allows the user to summon a manifestation of Ebrietas herself, specifically her tentacles, tearing through space from the direction of Is to grasp and crush whatever the user directs them at. It is essentially a small, partial summoning of the Great One. The choir learned to do this. They learned to open a door, briefly, to where Ebrietas was, and pull part of her through. The fact that she permitted this is significant. Ebrietas allowed herself to be invoked this way. She allowed pieces of her physical form to be weaponized by the scholars who communed with her. Whether this was because she genuinely wanted to help, or because the choir's rituals were powerful enough to compel it, or because in Ebrietas' alien understanding of the world, the distinction between helping and being compelled did not register, clearly, as we cannot say with certainty. But the Augur exists. She was there when they called. A call beyond is the other primary weapon associated with her communion. Its description tells us that the tiny star it conjures represents the power of a great one, specifically that it channels the destructive force of stellar bodies, the explosive energy of something burning at the heart of a distant sun. This is arcane power at its most genuinely cosmic, not the alchemical or ritual blood-based magic of the healing church's mainstream, but something that comes from the actual stars, from the land of Is, where the cosmos presses against the physical world like a palm against glass. Ebrietas gave the choir access to star power. to the energy of distant burning things channeled through her, translated into a form that human hands could direct and use. This is extraordinary, and it was given in the spirit of collaboration, of shared searching, of two lost things looking in the same direction and deciding that looking together was better than looking alone. The failure of that collaboration is, in retrospect, almost inevitable. The choir could not handle what Ebrietas was offering, not because they were stupid or wicked, they were neither, but because the gap between what a great one is and what a human mind can accommodate is simply too large to fully bridge through willpower and ritual. Every step the choir took toward genuine communion was a step toward the dissolution of the human consciousness that was doing the stepping. The closer they got to understanding Ebrietas, the less of themselves remained to understand her, and Ebrietas watched this process. She must have watched it, present in her chamber while the scholars above her conducted their experiments and slowly lost their minds to the truth she was sharing with them. Did she understand what was happening? Did she try to warn them? Did she even have the conceptual framework to recognize that what she was giving them was more than they could hold? The altar of despair where you find her is not labelled that way by accident. Despair is a specific kind of grief, not acute grief, which burns hot and changes things, but chronic grief. The grief of someone who has lost hope that the situation will improve. The altar bears that name because it is where hope went to die. The choir's hope for transcendence, Ebrietas's hope for company, the possibility of genuine communion between the human and the cosmic, all of it at an altar of despair, the daughter of the cosmos, left behind. Weeping at an altar of despair that bears, if you think about it, exactly the right name. There is a name written in the margins of the law notes scattered through Yharnam, a name spoken with a kind of reverent frustration by Mikolash in his fractured, looping ramble through the nightmare of Mensis, the Byrgenwerth spider, the one who hides all manner of rituals. Her name is Rom, and of all the great ones, she is perhaps the one whose story is the most human, because she started as a human. Rom was a scholar of Byrgenwerth, not a famous one. Her name appears nowhere in the histories the way Willem's does, or Lawrence's, but a scholar nonetheless. Someone who sat in those classrooms by the lake, pored over ancient texts, debated the nature of the cosmos with her colleagues. Someone who chose to go to the fishing hamlet when the scholars organized their expedition, who walked down the shore in the long shadows of the evening, who came close enough to Kos to receive something from her. What exactly happened between Rom and Kos in the fishing hamlet is not stated explicitly. Mikolash tells us directly, in his fracturing ramble, "Ah, Kos, or some say Kosum, do you hear our prayers? As you once did for the vacuous Rom, grant us eyes, grant us eyes." So Kos granted Rom eyes. She gave this scholar something: insight, cosmic awareness, a glimpse of the eldritch truth that no other scholar in that expedition received in the same way. The result was transformation. Rom ascended. She became something no longer quite human and not quite great one either. The game's distinction between kin, humans who have transcended, and true great ones applies here, though the line is blurry in her case. She emerged as the vast spider-like creature we find beneath the Moonside Lake at Byrgenwerth, tended by the aged and silent Master Willem, who has been watching over her, or perhaps being watched over by her for longer than most people know. Her title, vacuous is telling. In English, it means empty or devoid of meaning. The original Japanese is more direct. It means idiotic or half-witted. The scholars who named her were not being cruel exactly. They were describing a specific spiritual condition. Rom gained eyes, gained insight, but not fully. Her transformation was incomplete, or perhaps took a form that was simply incomprehensible to conventional scholarly assessment. She ascended, but not to the level that would have allowed for the kind of transcendence Master Willem and Lawrence had hoped to achieve. Or perhaps she ascended in a completely different direction than anyone expected, and what looks like vacancy from the outside is something else entirely on the inside. Because here is what Rom does. This vacuous spider in her moonlit lake. She hides the truth. She maintains a veil over the entire city of Yharnam, the lesser Amygdalae that cling to the buildings of the cathedral ward, draped over the facades of the churches, hanging from the arches like enormous spiders themselves. They are invisible to ordinary eyes, to everyone in Yharnam who lacks sufficient insight to see past the veil. This city looks like a city. Horrible, yes. Plague-ridden and blood-soaked, but comprehensibly horrible. Human-scale horrible. Not the cosmic horror that it actually is. Rom maintains that veil. She is the barrier between what Yharnam is and what its inhabitants can see. And she maintains it passively. Not out of malice, not out of some agenda. She simply sits in her lake, attended by her spawn, and the veil exists as a function of her presence. When you kill her, everything changes. The veil drops. The blood moon appears. Suddenly, completely, terrifyingly close. The lesser Amygdalae become visible everywhere. The pregnant women of Yharnam give birth to cosmic horrors. The hunt becomes something qualitatively different from what it was before, not merely more dangerous, but more true to what it actually is. The question of why Rom maintains the veil is one of Bloodborne's most beautiful ambiguities. Is she protecting the people of Yharnam, keeping them insulated from truths that would shatter them? Is she serving some agenda of the Great Ones, keeping the situation stable until the right moment? Is she following Willem's instructions, some long ago agreement between the old scholar and his transformed student? Or is the veil simply something she does the way a dam holds water? Not from intention, but from the nature of what she is. Master Willem sits on his rocking chair at the edge of the Byrgenwerth balcony, looking out over the moonside lake where Rom rests below. He has been sitting there for an indeterminate amount of time. He does not speak when you approach. He merely points down, toward the lake, toward Rom. Whether this is guidance, an invitation, or an attempt to communicate something else entirely is left to interpretation. Rom herself is non-hostile until you provoke her. She sits in her lake, surrounded by her children. Smaller spider creatures with the same strange rock-like faces Ian does not initiate, does not threaten. Her fight, when it happens, has an elegiac quality. She summons her children to protect her. She flings arcane ice at the sky. She is not a hunter confronting prey. She's a creature defending itself. When she dies, the blue light that has characterized her lake turns red. The game tells you, through the shift in color and the sudden appearance of the blood moon, that something fundamental has changed. That you have crossed a threshold you cannot go back over. There is a body in the altar of despair that Ebrietas mourns over, a creature resembling Rom. There is a theory that this was a healing church scholar who spent too much time in communion with Ebrietas and underwent the same kind of transformation Rom did. That becoming Rom-like, becoming a vacuous spider, is a known outcome of certain kinds of exposure to Great One essence. That Rom's form might be less unique than it seems, might be a category of existence that humans can fall into when cosmic awareness arrives in a form their minds can only partially accommodate. A spider who hides all manner of rituals, a former student who gained eyes as a gift from a dying goddess, the keeper of a veil between what Yharnam appears to be and what Yharnam is. Vacuous, they called her. But she has been doing her quiet, enormous work long after the scholars who named her are gone, and Yharnam itself is ruin. Maybe the vacancy was theirs. Let us think about the Moonside Lake itself for a moment, because it is one of the strangest locations in the game, and it does not get enough attention. You reach it by diving into the well at the centre of Byrgenwerth, a choice that the game presents without comment or ceremony, simply a well in a courtyard and the option to step into it. You fall, and instead of hitting the bottom of a well, you emerge into an entirely different space. A vast, still lake under a perpetual blue-silver light. The sky above, it is sky-coloured, not ceiling-coloured. The lake is calm and shallow enough to walk on. There are columns rising from it, ruins of something older than the college above, and at the centre of the lake's silence, attended by smaller versions of herself, is Rom. The Moonside Lake is not underground in any conventional sense. It exists in a liminal space, adjacent to Byrgenwerth, connected to it through the well, but not occupying the same physical reality. It is a place that has been set aside, separated from the ordinary world by whatever process-produced room herself. A pocket of altered reality around a being who now sits between human and cosmic existence, between what Byrgenwerth was and what it was reaching toward. Master Willem's relationship with Rom deserves its own extended consideration. He was her teacher before she was what she is now. He sat in that college by the lake and encouraged his students to seek insight, to line their brains with eyes metaphorically and sometimes literally, to push past the limits of ordinary human awareness into something larger. Rom took that instruction further than anyone else. She received the eyes from Kos directly and was transformed into something her teacher could not follow her into. And then Willem stayed. He did not leave Byrgenwerth when Lawrence left to found the healing church. He did not go with the scholars who went to the fishing hamlet. He sat in his college and then, eventually, on his rocking chair on the balcony, and he watched the lake. Watching his student, perhaps. Watching the veil she maintains. Watching the blood moon that occasionally tries to break through the surface of the ordinary sky, held back by Rom's presence. There are messages from Willem that appear in the game, written guidance, philosophical fragments. He believed that the path to human transcendence ran through insight, through the gaining of eyes, through understanding rather than physical modification by blood. He was right in a specific way. The third ending, the most transformative one, requires the player to have consumed 3 umbilical cords, 3 fragments of Great One essence. It requires insight in the literal mechanical sense. The insight stat must be at a certain level for the true ending to be available. Willem's philosophy, not Lawrence's, turns out to be the one that points toward genuine transcendence, but his prize student's transformation into the vacuous spider in the lake below, is a reminder that insight, pushed to its limit, does not produce the luminous consciousness Willem imagined. It produces something vast and alien, and only partially comprehensible to outside observers. Rom's insight is immense. Her awareness is enormous. She perceives the truth of Yharnam completely, and what she does with that perception is nothing visible or articulate or communicable. She simply maintains the veil. She simply keeps the world as it is, one more day behind the blue surface of the lake. When you break through that surface, when you descend into the lake and force the confrontation that ends with Rom's death, you are not making Yharnam more honest. You are removing a protection. The blood moon that rises after Rom's death is not a revelation in the sense of being a gift. It is exposure. It is the world stripped of the last layer of insulation between what Yharnam's people can survive perceiving and what is actually there. The pregnant women of Yharnam give birth after the blood moon rises. They have been pregnant, touched by Oedon, carrying cosmic children throughout the events of the game. Rom's veil kept their condition hidden, kept the cosmic implications of the night from manifesting physically. Once the veil is gone, the pregnancies resolve. The babies arrive. None of them are human. Rom was holding that back. All of it. The births, the blood moon, the visibility of the Amygdala, the full horror of what Yharnam had become, held at bay by one scholar's partial transcendence and the veil that transcendence created around her. A spider who hides all manner of rituals, a former student who gained eyes as a gift from a dying goddess. The keeper of a veil between what Yharnam appears to be and what Yharnam is. Vacuous, still doing the work, long after anyone thought to thank her for it. Picture something vast, something that clings to the outside of a cathedral the way a climbing vine clings to a wall, but enormous, reaching, multi-limbed. Something with a head shaped like a tonsil, like the immune nodes in a human throat, the body's first barrier against infection, but expanded to the size of a carriage, filled with dozens of lidless, constantly open eyes, 7 arms, each ending in 6-fingered hands, legs bent like a mantis's, a body that catches the light wrong, that seems to absorb it rather than reflect it, and then multiply it. Because there is not one Amygdala, there are many. They are on the buildings of the cathedral ward, invisible to anyone without sufficient insight. They hang from the architecture of Yahargul, draped over stone like impossible decorations. They appear in the nightmare realms, in the chalice dungeons. The iconography of Amygdala runs through Yharnam's religious architecture the way water runs through pipes, statues in the grandest, cathedral, shrines in the Hippogean jail, representations of that elongated, many-eyed form on every surface that carries religious significance. The very name is a key. Amygdala is the Greek and Latin word for almond. But more relevantly, the amygdala is a neural structure deep in the temporal lobes of the human brain, a paired set of nuclei responsible for processing memory, decision-making, and above all, fear. The brain's fear center, the structure that generates the fight or flight response, that tags memories with emotional significance, that determines whether something you encounter should be feared and how much. The amygdala is named after the part of the human brain that processes fear. And what do the amygdalae do to people in Yharnam? They grab them. They hold them in enormous hands and squeeze, triggering the frenzy status, which is the game's representation of a human mind breaking down from proximity to cosmic horror. The fear response amplified past any threshold the brain can survive. There is another connection embedded in the naming. Amygdala is also the Greek word for tonsils. The human tonsils are immune organs, the first barrier against pathogens that enter through the mouth and nose, the structures that catch infections before they can penetrate deeper into the body. The tonsil stone item in the game, a small rock that looks like Amygdala's head, is what you need to gain access to the Nightmare Frontier, where the Great One Amygdala actually resides. The tonsil is the key to the tonsil, and if the amygdalae are, metaphorically, immune cells, the body's defense against infection, what are they defending? Perhaps the nightmare realms themselves, perhaps the cosmic order, perhaps they are guardians of the threshold between ordinary reality and the places where great ones actually exist, ensuring that nothing reaches those places that hasn't proven its worth. Patches the Spider, one of the game's recurring trickster, figures who appears in various From Software titles in different forms, is a devoted worshipper of Amygdala. He calls Amygdala the Godhead, a term from Judeo-Christian theology referring to the unique and supreme nature of God. He facilitates sacrifices to Amygdala, using the tonsil stone to lure unsuspecting travellers into the Nightmare Frontier, offering them to his god with a cackle that doesn't quite conceal something that might be genuine reverence. When you kill Amygdala, Patches is initially shocked, then philosophical. "Think not of poor Amygdala," he says. "Upon that piteous bastard you bestowed salvation." This is an interesting formulation. Salvation from what? From existence in the nightmare, presumably. From whatever imprisonment or loneliness or cosmic constraint the Amygdala existed within. The Nightmare Frontier itself, the realm where the boss Amygdala waits at the top of a tower, invisible until you get close, then dropping down to confront you, is a place of poison swamps and yeti-like creatures throwing boulders and winter lanterns with their glowing, brain-exposed heads that induce frenzy at a glance. It is not a pleasant place. It is a place of testing, of endurance, of navigating genuine suffering to reach something at the centre. The Amygdala who presides over this place drops the ailing Lauren chalice when defeated, a key to a lost civilization we will explore in other videos. This connection to Lauren, the ancient city that predated even Yharnam and was consumed by the beast scourge in an earlier age, suggests that Amygdala's presence in the nightmare is related to ancient history, to catastrophes that happened long before the events of the game. What do the Amygdalae want? The game does not tell us clearly. They seem to gather where Great One influence is strong. They appear in greater numbers after Rom's death, when the blood moon rises and the barriers between planes thin. They transport hunters to specific nightmare locations under specific circumstances, as if serving some routing function in the cosmic architecture of Yharnam's nightmare geography. One theory holds that the Amygdalae are something like resonance structures, entities drawn to places of concentrated Great One energy, the way iron filings are drawn to a magnet, clustering where the influence of their greater cousins is strongest. Another holds that they serve a more active protective function, guarding the nightmares from intrusion by beings who haven't earned the access. A third theory, perhaps the most poignant. The Amygdalae are themselves a kind of lesser Great One, not as elevated as Oedon or the Moon presence, but real cosmic entities in their own right, who cling to the architecture of Yharnam because this is the place where the Great Ones once walked and might walk again, and they are waiting, simply waiting. The way some animals return to a place long after the reason for returning has gone, following a pull too deep for conscious thought. Let us look at what the lesser Amygdalae, the smaller invisible versions that cling to the cathedral walled buildings, actually do in the game, because it is more than simply existing and watching. If you stand beneath a lesser Amygdala and your insight is high enough to see it, something can happen. The enormous hand will descend. It will close around the hunter, and then the screen goes black and the hunter reappears somewhere else entirely, specifically in the lecture hall. The lesser Amygdalae can transport high insight hunters to a place that exists between worlds, between the ordinary city and the nightmare realms, a space of academic architecture drifting in the void. This is startling behavior if you encounter it without knowing what is happening. A hand comes out of the sky and takes you somewhere you have never been. The Amygdalae are performing a service or a function, moving entities they deem ready to the next stage of the cosmological progression. The lecture hall is the intermediate space between Yharnam and the nightmare of Mensis, and the Amygdalae's transportation creates the connection that allows the player to proceed. Whether this is a gift, a test, or simply an automatic response, the cosmic equivalent of a conveyor belt rather than a deliberate act of assistance, is genuinely unclear, but the pattern is consistent. The Amygdalae do not transport everyone. They transport hunters who have reached a certain level of insight, who have seen enough of the truth to be considered by whatever standard the Amygdalae apply, ready for what comes next. The church at Yahargul, the unseen village, is one of the most Amygdala-saturated locations in the game. Yahargul is a district of Yharnam that sits under the influence of the school of Mensis, a place where the veil between ordinary reality and the nightmare is especially thin, where the presence of the Great Ones bleeds through into the physical world more completely than anywhere else in the city. The architecture of Yahargul's church is covered in Amygdala iconography. There are statues, reliefs, carvings, all depicting that elongated, many-armed form, those dozens of open eyes. The congregation of Yahargul worshipped the Amygdalae directly, or worshipped what they represented, the accessible face of the Great One's presence in their part of the city. The school of Mensis captured people and brought them to Yahargul. The bell-ringing women who summoned black phantoms in that area were Mensis operatives, performing rituals to draw the Amygdalae's attention. The entire district functioned as a kind of offering, a place where the membrane between worlds was kept deliberately thin so that the Amygdalae could pass through it more easily, so that their presence would be stronger and more accessible to the rituals of communion the Mensis scholars were conducting. The result of this thinning of the membrane is visible everywhere in Yahargul after the blood moon rises. Full-sized Amygdalae are present in these streets, not invisible and clinging to walls, but openly present, enormous, participating in whatever the blood moon state of Yharnam actually is. They stand among the buildings the way monuments stand in a plaza, occupying the space surrounded by it, neither interacting with it nor ignoring it, simply present, and there are chains. Throughout Yahargul and its surrounding areas, enormous golden chains hang from points that have no apparent source, descending from the sky, from the upper edges of buildings, from the darkness between buildings. The chains are attached to the physical architecture of the world, as if something is holding it down, or holding it together, or preventing it from drifting toward wherever nightmare realms exist when they are not being navigated by hunters. The Amygdala may be the ones holding those chains, not metaphorically, the role of cosmic structural support, keeping the physical world physically coherent enough to be navigated, might be part of what they do. The Amygdala as the armature of reality itself, the structures around which the material world is organized. The reason that buildings remain standing in a city where the laws of physics are under obvious strain. They are fear given form. They are the tonsils of a world with an infection it cannot fight. They are the Godhead, according to Patches, and Patches knows something about working in the shadow of powers greater than himself. What I know for certain is this: they are everywhere, even when you cannot see them. Even now, in this darkness you have made for yourself by turning out the lights and lying down. They are clinging to the walls of wherever you are. Their many eyes are open, you just cannot see them yet. You never see Mergo. In an entire game full of monsters made visible, of cosmic horrors rendered in explicit and terrifying detail, the moon presence descending from the sky, Amygdala dropping from its tower, Ebrietas turning from her mourning to face you, Mergo remains invisible, a crib that seems empty, a cry that fills the entire nightmare of Mensis and follows the player if their insight is high enough. A presence so unresolvable that you cannot even be certain at the end whether you have ended it or merely freed it. Mergo is formless, like its father, Oedon. The child inherits the nature of the more powerful parent, and Oedon's nature is to exist without physical form. We know this much. Mergo was the child of Oedon and Queen Yharnam, the great ruler of the ancient Thumerian civilization. The Thumerian queen, pregnant and magnificent, was a figure of enormous spiritual significance to her people. Her communion with the Great Ones was central to Thumerian religion, but the child she carried was not given the chance to live in any ordinary sense. Mergo appears to have been stillborn, or pulled from the womb before it was time, in circumstances that left its mother chained in blood-soaked white garments in the deepest chalice dungeons for uncountable years. Queen Yharnam appears to you as a ghost after you defeat Rom and the blood moon rises. She stands in the blood moon's light, her presence silent and sorrowful, the wound at her abdomen visible even at a distance. She appears again outside the nightmare of Mensis, watching the door to the place where her child exists in its strange, formless half-life. And after you defeat Mergo's wet nurse, after you silence the crying, she bows, not in triumph, in thanks, in something that looks, across the enormous distance between her nature and yours, like exhausted relief. Consider what Queen Yharnam's existence has been. In the time between the creation of Mergo and the events of the game, she ruled the Thumerian civilization at its height. She was central to its religious practices, its rituals of blood communion, its relationship with the Great Ones. Her pregnancy, carrying the child of the formless Oedon, was a source of tremendous spiritual significance to her people. The Thumerian queen pregnant with a Great One's child, this was the pinnacle of everything her civilization was reaching toward. The ultimate communion, the bridge between human and cosmic, made flesh within her body. And then she lost the child, or the child was never fully born, or the child was born but could not survive in physical form, being the offspring of a formless father who existed only in voice and essence. Whatever happened, the result was that Mergo was consigned to a nightmare state, neither living nor truly dead, neither fully present nor entirely gone, while Queen Yharnam was consigned to the depths of the Thumerian labyrinths, chained, her wound perpetual, her grief unresolvable. We find her in the deepest Thumerian chalice dungeons, still chained, still in her blood-soaked white gown. The game does not tell us how long she has been there. Given that the Thumerian civilization predates Yharnam by thousands of years, she may have been in those chains for time spans that make human history look brief. She has become something semi-divine herself. The ritual significance of her pregnancy, the Great One essence of her carried child, the depth of time she has spent in proximity to Oedon's influence. All of it has changed her. She's not simply a dead queen, she's a being suspended between states, the way her child is suspended between states, each of them trapped in a kind of waiting that has no natural end. This is why her bow at the end, when Mergo is finally silenced, carries the weight it does. She has been waiting for this for an incalculable amount of time. Through the rise and fall of Thumeru, through the foundation of Yharnam, above the ruins of her civilization, through the healing church and the scourge and every night of the hunt that has come and gone, above the labyrinth where she is chained. Through all of it, she has been waiting for someone to reach Mergo in the nightmare and bring the crying to an end. The school of Mensis, in their fumbling attempt to force contact with the Great One, stumbled onto the right target. They reached Mergo. Their ritual was successful, but they did not reach Mergo to offer it peace. They reached Mergo to exploit it, to use the infant Great One's presence as a source of cosmic power, to drain from a child's nightmare the resources the Mensis scholars wanted for their own transcendence. The Mensis ritual was the worst possible version of reaching Mergo, contact made for the wrong reasons, in the wrong way, with no consideration for what the contact cost. The hunter's path to the nightmare of Mensis and the eventual silencing of Mergo's cry is, in one reading, the thing that the Mensis scholars should have done from the beginning, to find the infant, to acknowledge its distress, to end the nightmare that its loss created, not for power, not for transcendence, simply because the crying needed to stop, and the queen in the labyrinth had been waiting for someone with sufficient insight and sufficient courage to do it. The game does not present this ending as triumphant. Nightmare slain is the text. The silence that follows is the reward. Queen Yharnam bows, and then she is gone, and you're alone in the nightmare that is starting to fall apart around you. And there is no fanfare, no celebration, only the quiet of something that has finally been laid to rest after far too long. The school of Mensis, led by Mikolash, established contact with Mergo through a ritual involving the Mensis cage, the metal lattice worn on the head that was meant to open the scholars' minds to cosmic frequencies, and an umbilical cord, a biological fragment of the connection between Mergo and the mortal world. The ritual succeeded, contact was made, and it destroyed them. The item description for the relevant umbilical cord reads, "This cord granted Mensis audience with Mergo, but resulted in the stillbirth of their brains. Stillbirth of their brains. The infant Great One, Mergo, touched the minds of the Mensis scholars, and they were emptied out. Their consciousness did not survive the contact. Their bodies continued to function. You encounter them as shuffling, mindless things in the nightmare corridors. But what made them scholars, what made them people, was gone. Mergo did not do this out of malice. Mergo did not do anything in the deliberate sense. Contact with a great one, even a great one in a state between existence and non-existence, is simply more than a human mind is equipped to survive. The crying infant in its crib in the nightmare of Mensis is not a monster seeking to destroy. It is a being in distress, trapped in a dimension it should never have been pulled into, wailing for a mother who cannot reach it, drawing the nightmare into existence around itself simply by existing. The nightmare of Mensis, that terrible landscape of impossible geometry and cosmic horror, the spiked towers, the lunar-bright sky, the brain hanging in the void, is a consequence of Mergo's distress. It is not a prison built to contain Mergo. It is the nightmare that Mergo's loss created, the landscape of grief made spatial and habitable. Mergo's wet nurse guards the crib. This creature, tall, skeletal, draped in black robes, wielding 6 blades that emerge from arms that stretch and spin with terrible grace, appears to be a Pthumerian noblewoman, twisted beyond recognition by Great One power, or possibly a spirit called into existence specifically to protect and nurture the unborn child. She folds her wings over the crib when you approach, instinctively protective. She does not attack until you do. She's doing exactly what she was made to do. The fight against Mergo's wet nurse is held under the blood moon in a circular arena, the crying a constant background to the combat. If you fight for long enough, a veil of darkness descends and shadow clones of the wet nurse appear, attacking from directions you cannot anticipate. It is one of the most atmospherically oppressive fights in the game, not because the wet nurse herself is particularly complicated to fight, but because of everything surrounding her. The crying, the moon, the emptiness of the crib. When you defeat her, the crying stops, and then, if you listen, if your insight is sufficient, you hear something else, a faint laugh, a giggle, something that might be, in the most generous interpretation, an infant pleased by a music box or grateful for a release from an existence that was never meant to be. Queen Yharnam bows and disappears. The nightmare of Mensis does not disappear. The nightmare remains, because nightmares built from losses this large do not simply evaporate when the immediate cause is addressed. The school of Mensis's minds are still emptied. The cost of their ritual was paid and cannot be refunded. But something has changed. Something has quieted. Whether Mergo still exists in some form released into the cosmos, freed from a nightmare it was never supposed to inhabit, or whether the silence after the crying is the silence of a great one that has finally ceased to be, the game does not tell us. Queen Yharnam's bow suggests release rather than destruction. The game's text says nightmare slain when the wet nurse falls, which implies the nightmare was Mergo, and that the nightmare has ended. But Mergo was formless. Formless things are very hard to kill. Before we continue deeper into the Great Ones themselves, there is something we need to talk about, something small and easy to overlook, something that moves through the game world like a thread connecting everything to everything else. The phantasms. You have seen them. They are the slug-like creatures that appear throughout Bloodborne. Slow-moving, pale, almost gentle-looking in their unhurried traversal of whatever surface they happen to be crossing. They appear in the Chalice dungeons, on the floors of certain rooms, moving with the purposeful aimlessness of something that does not need to hurry because it is not going anywhere in particular. They appear in the fishing hamlet area. They appear embedded in certain enemies and items as the source of the arcane or transformative properties those things possess. They appear, most significantly, in the initial contact between the scholars of Byrgenwerth and Ebrietas, the partially successful summoning that used phantasms as augurs, as intermediaries, as living antenna for the signal the Great Ones broadcast. The phantasms are augurs of the Great Ones, creatures whose existence bridges the gap between the physical world and the cosmic plane on which the Great Ones actually exist. They are, in the most literal sense, the language through which the Great Ones communicate with material reality. The augur of Ebrietas, that ritual that tears open a rift and drags Ebrietas' tentacles through, is built on the properties of the phantasms. The rift they open is the same kind of connection the slugs naturally maintain between worlds. The choir learn to use them not as the slugs themselves are used, passively as living receivers and transmitters, but actively as keys to a door that normally only opens from one side. There is something poignant about the phantasms in the context of the Great One's universal grief. These are the creatures that serve as messengers between the Great Ones and the world below. And what the Great Ones primarily have to communicate across that vast distance is longing, loss, the desire for a child that is no longer there. Every time a phantasm crosses a floor in the Chalice dungeons, it is carrying something of the Great Ones with it. Not a message in any form that can be decoded or read, more like a temperature, an emotional residue, the way certain places hold the feeling of grief long after the person who grieved there is gone. The messengers in the hunter's dream are related to this same principle. Those small, pale, childlike creatures with their elongated faces and their cheerful waves. They deliver items, they serve the hunter, they gather at gravestones and peek out from jars and generally inhabit the dream's margin with a quality of joyful purposefulness that sits oddly against everything else in the game. They are not explained. Their origin is never stated. They simply are there, serving with apparent enthusiasm. One theory holds that the messengers are the spirits of children, specifically children who died in the Healing Church's experiments, released from the cycle of nightmare through the Moon Presence's dream and finding a kind of purpose and community in their role as helpers. The connection to dead children is speculative but carries emotional weight. Another theory holds that they are phantasms in humanoid form, or that phantasms and messengers are two expressions of the same principle, the living membrane between worlds made manifest in different shapes. What the messengers share with the phantasms is this: they are present without being threatening. In a world absolutely saturated with things that will hurt you, these small creatures move through it with the confidence of things that have never needed to be afraid, as if they operate on a different plane of concern from everything else in Yharnam, not elevated, not transcendent, but sideways, slightly off to one side of the main drama, attending to their own quiet purposes. They wave at you from their graves in the dream. In a game about death and loss and the terrible cost of reaching too far, the messengers wave at you from their graves, and the wave is friendly, and they seem glad you are there. This is, in Bloodborne's universe, not nothing. This is possibly everything. The phantasms carry the Great One's signal into the world. The messengers carry something else, something that might be comfort or solidarity, or simply the acknowledgement that you are here and they have noticed. In a game that is largely composed of things that are trying to destroy you, the creatures that just want to wave deserve a moment of recognition. I want to take a moment here, before we go deeper into the darker territories of what remains. If you are still awake, if these words are reaching you clearly, if the Great Ones have not yet carried you gently into whatever dreams are waiting for you tonight, then thank you. Thank you for being here, for trusting this space with your attention and your rest. If you're finding this valuable, if nights like this help you wind down and let the world outside recede, please consider subscribing to Nightfall Lore. It takes time to put these explorations together, and knowing they matter to you makes that time meaningful. And if there is a corner of Bloodborne's lore, or another game's world entirely, that you would love to disappear into on a sleepless night, leave a comment. I read every single one, but now back to the dark. There are more great ones waiting. Before we reach the brain of Mensis, there is a small, pale, tragic thing we need to talk about. Something that is easy to overlook because it appears at first to be just another enemy in just another cathedral. But the celestial emissary is not just another enemy, it is a child. Or rather, it was. You find the celestial emissaries in the upper cathedral ward, wandering the empty halls in small groups. They are tall and thin and pale, their heads swollen to proportions that suggest whatever is inside them has grown beyond what a human skull was designed to contain. Their movements are slow and strange, alien without being overtly threatening. They look, in their silence and their wandering, less like creatures hunting you, and more like creatures that have forgotten what they were doing and cannot quite remember, which is, in a sense, exactly what they are. The Healing Church's choir used orphans, children taken from the streets of Yharnam, children who had no families to ask questions about what happened to them, as subjects for their experiments in cosmic ascension. The choir's goal was transcendence, to elevate human consciousness to the point where it could directly perceive and commune with great ones without being destroyed. They believed that children's minds, being more flexible, more receptive, less calcified by habit and ordinary experience, might be better candidates for this kind of forced evolution. They were right in a specific and terrible way. The children did change. They did ascend after a fashion. Their minds did become capable of perceiving things that ordinary human minds cannot, but they did not ascend to the luminous communion the choir was imagining. They became the celestial emissaries, beings that are no longer quite human, not quite great one, suspended somewhere in between in a state that erases the child that was there before. Their inflated heads, covered in the same blue-grey skin as Ebrietas, trace back to what the choir did to them, the attempts to line their brains with eyes, to force the same cognitive expansion that Master Willem had pursued by more gradual means. In these children, the expansion happened, but it did not leave room for the child's personality, the child's memories, the child's sense of self. Those things were burned away by the cosmic awareness that replaced them. Some lore scholars believe the choir created the celestial emissaries partly as a gift for Ebrietas, surrogate children for a great one who had lost her own. The visual similarity between the emissaries and Ebrietas supports this reading. The choir knew that the great ones yearn for surrogate children. They may have believed that creating beings in Ebrietas' image would ease her grief and cement their relationship with her. If this was the intention, it did not work. Ebrietas kneels at the altar of despair and mourns, and the celestial emissaries wander the empty halls above her, purposeless in the way that things which have had their purpose taken away are purposeless. They are not in pain, exactly. They are not capable of articulating pain in any form we can recognize. But they are not at rest either. They are simply there, walking slowly through the rooms where the choir used to conduct their experiments, waiting for something that never comes. The celestial emissary boss. There is a large variant that guards one of the upper cathedral ward's deeper chambers, is a being that can disguise itself as one of the smaller emissaries, blending into a group until you get close enough for it to reveal itself. This behavior is disorienting, partly because you have been walking past emissaries for the whole level and treating them as non-hostile, and partly because the reveal is violent and sudden in a way that feels like a betrayal. Something that looked passive suddenly was not. Whether this is the emissary defending itself or something more intentional, some vestige of the children's survival instinct, the last remaining echo of a human drive to protect oneself, is not clear. The larger emissary drops the communion rune when defeated. Communion, connection, the thing that the choir sought in their experiments, the thing that was burned out of the children to make room for the cosmic awareness that replaced it. They were called to be bridges between humanity and the Great Ones. They became something that is neither. They are the choir's legacy, wandering in the dark in a building their creators have long since abandoned. There is something in the nightmare of Mensis that is not a boss exactly, though you can hurt it. It hangs in the void beyond the highest window of the nightmare's towers, a massive, pulsating organ roughly brain-shaped, studded with dozens of enormous eyes, dangling two misshapen limbs from its lower mass, like a parody of a body that was built wrong or built incomplete. The Mensis scholars found it in the nightmare when they first broke through. They brought it back. Or rather, they lifted it into its tower, positioned it as a kind of guardian, a sentinel against intrusion. This was not their best decision. The brain of Mensis is a Great One, not a kin, not a creature touched by Great One influence, a genuine, full Great One found lost in the nightmare realms, but it is a Great One that has been compromised. The eyes lining its surface are, as one description tells us, evil in nature. The brain itself has rotted. Whatever this entity was before it was found in the nightmare and installed in a tower by the school of Mensis, it is something diminished and wrong now. It still exerts the Great One's signature effect on human minds. Its gaze causes the frenzy status, the representation of a consciousness tearing itself apart under cosmic pressure. But it does not seem to be doing this deliberately. It simply is what it is, and what it is causes frenzy. When you interact with it using the make contact gesture, holding your arms out in the ritual posture of communion with Great Ones, you are rewarded with 3 insight, the game's currency of cosmic awareness. The brain recognizes the gesture. It recognizes the attempt at communication. Whether what passes between you in that moment is actual communication, or merely the residue of an instinct the brain once used when it was less compromised, less rotted, less confined, this is genuinely unclear. You can kill it. Or rather, You can damage its physical form enough that it falls into the chasm below the nightmare of Mensis. If you follow it down there, if you make your way to the bottom, you can find it again. It still tries to look at you with those terrible eyes, but if you use the make contact gesture again, rather than attacking, it will grant you one of the most powerful runes in the game, the Moon Rune, which significantly increases the number of blood echoes you earn from defeating enemies. The relationship implied by that exchange is strange and quiet, something that has been hurt, possibly beyond recovery, still recognizing an outstretched hand, still responding to the gesture of communion even after everything. The brain of Mensis was, in some earlier time, something that moved through the cosmos with purpose and power. It ended up in a nightmare, then in a tower, then in a chasm, then at the bottom of everything, half rotted and frenzied, giving gifts to whatever hunter happens to be kind enough to approach with open arms. It is not a comfortable thing to think about, so let the thought settle gently and we will move on. Kos, or some say Cosm. Mikolash repeats the name in his looping nightmare monologue. Do you hear our prayers? As you once did for the vacuous Rom, grant us eyes, grant us eyes. Kos is different from the other great ones we have met in ways that are specific and important. She did not descend from the cosmos. She did not emerge from a dream or a nightmare. She lived in the physical world, specifically in the ocean beside a small fishing hamlet on the coast near Yharnam, and she had a genuine relationship with the people who lived there. Let that settle for a moment, because it matters. Every other great one we have encountered exists in relation to humanity at a remove. Oedon moves through blood as an invisible essence. Ebrietas was found abandoned in the deep labyrinth. Rom hides herself beneath a moonlit lake. Amygdala clings to walls that most people cannot see. Even the moon presence operates through intermediaries, through dreams and hunters and the slow architecture of manipulation. Kos was different. Kos lived in the ocean beside a village, not watching from a distance, not accessible only to those with sufficient insight, simply present, the way the tide is present, the way the moon on the water is present, vast and luminous and real. The villagers of the fishing hamlet worshipped Kos, but it was not the worship of a distant and indifferent divine. She was present. She provided for them. They incorporated elements of her being into their bodies, parasites that Kos gave to them, creatures that lived symbiotically within the villagers and granted them abilities, protections, a connection to the cosmic force that Kos represented. Some of the villagers wore shells and sea-themed garments in her honor. They carried her essence within them, literally and biologically, and they and Kos existed together in something that looked, from the outside, like a genuine community of mutual care. Think about what that means in the context of everything we know about the Great Ones. The Thumerian queens communed with them through ritual and blood. The Healing Church built an elaborate hierarchy to manage access to Ebrietas. The School of Mensis tore their own minds apart trying to force contact with Mergo. And here, in this small hamlet at the edge of the sea, ordinary fisherfolk had a relationship with the Great One so natural and so reciprocal that they carried pieces of her inside their bodies and walked around in the world as living symbols of that bond. This is, in Bloodborne's universe, extraordinary. It is possibly the only example we have of what a healthy relationship between humans and a Great One might look like. Not worship in the sense of prostration and terror, something closer to kinship, something that had developed over time through sustained proximity and genuine exchange. And then it ended. Then the scholars of Byrgenwerth came. We covered the fishing hamlet massacre in detail in other Nightfall lore videos, so I will not dwell on the full horror of what happened there tonight. What matters for our understanding of Kos is this. When the scholars arrived, she was already on the shore. Whether she was alive, dying, or already dead when they reached her body is genuinely ambiguous. What is not ambiguous is what the scholars did next. They cut into her, they took samples, they violated her corpse with the clinical detachment of people who had decided, before they even arrived, that the villagers and their goddess were specimens rather than people. Gehrman was there, Lady Maria was there, church officials were there, and each of them, whatever they felt about what they were doing, whatever justifications they carried with them, participated in the desecration. Let us be precise about what was taken, because it matters to the broader story. The parasites that Kos had given to the villagers, the symbiotic creatures that lived within the fisherfolk's bodies and granted them their particular connection to her, were extracted and studied. The Kos parasite is an item in the game, described as a creature that writhed inside the surrogate of a great one and gained its characteristics over time. It is one of the strangest and most powerful weapons in Bloodborne, functioning as a trick weapon that channels arcane energy in a way that only works when the user has high insight, when the user can perceive the wavelengths of the Great Ones. Without that perception, the parasite does almost nothing. It is, in a very direct way, a weapon that requires you to see the world the way the fishing hamlet villagers saw it, to carry within your own awareness something of the cosmic connection they were born into. Kos's own body was dissected for whatever the scholars could extract from it. Her blood, her tissues, her biological connection to the cosmos, all of it taken apart and catalogued. This is the deepest irony of the Bloodborne story. The entire system of blood ministration, the healing church, the hunter's workshops, the chalice dungeon research, everything that defines the game world, all of it flows ultimately from what the scholars took from a goddess they found on a shore and chose to treat as a resource rather than a being deserving of grief and reverence. Kos was pregnant. Inside her body was an unborn child, the entity we encounter in the hunter's nightmare as the Orphan of Kos. The scholar's violation of Kos's corpse was also a violation of her child, present during what was done to its mother, entering existence, if it can be called that, in the nightmare Kos's death created rather than in any kind of world that could have held it safely. The coastal folks' relationship with Kos extended to their entire way of life, in ways the scholars may not have fully appreciated, even as they catalogued everything they found. The villagers' skin had a quality different from Yharnam residents, grey-tinged, roughened, as if the ocean's properties had worked their way into the biology of people who had lived in proximity to a great one for generations. They were, slowly over those generations, becoming something adjacent to what Kos was, not transformed in the violent, traumatic way that blood ministration transformed people, changed gently, over time, the way coastal communities are changed by the sea. The scholars interrupted that process. They came, they took, they left. And in their wake they left a village of the dead, a goddess's violated body on the shore, and a child about to enter a nightmare. The villagers who were not killed outright by the scholars were experimented upon, Their parasites were extracted for study, their bodies were treated as resources, and then the scholars left, taking everything they had come for. The curse that followed was not metaphorical. The fishing hamlet's dead did not stay dead in the way that the dead are supposed to. They rose, as ghosts, as twisted shades, as things that are neither living nor at rest, and they haunt the hunter's nightmare. The nightmare itself is, in some interpretations, Kos's dying act, a curse called down on the hunters who committed the atrocity, a realm in which they are trapped forever, hunting endlessly with no purpose and no escape. The text of the game supports this reading. The item description for the Kos parasite, one of the parasites that can be extracted from the fishing hamlet, tells us that the coastal folk offered to Kos were born with intrinsic parasites, and that when Kos perished, she left these creatures to her people. When you defeat the Orphan of Kos in the hunter's nightmare, the narrator's voice speaks directly to the darkness. O Kos, or some say Kosm, as you once did for the vacuous Rom, grant us eyes, grant us eyes. Plant eyes on our brains to cleanse our beastly idiocy. This is the prayer of the hunters trapped in the nightmare. The prayer for sight, for understanding, for the gift that Kos once gave to Rom. But Rom received her eyes before the scholars came, before the atrocity, before the trust between Kos and humanity was broken beyond repair. Kos, uniquely among the Great Ones, appears to have deliberately created a nightmare as an act of justice. Not revenge exactly. There is a coldness to revenge that does not fit what we know of Kos's nature. This is closer to consequence, to the natural result of a violation made manifest in the fabric of reality. The hunters who killed and desecrated hunt forever in the place of their crime, and the villagers' ghosts are there to meet them. When you defeat the orphan and the incantation ends, the final line is, as you once did for the vacuous Rom, grant us eyes, and then silence. No answer, no eyes granted. The prayer goes up and nothing comes back, because the one who might have answered it is gone. Kos was the most human of the Great Ones, in the sense of being the most embedded in human community, the most present as a living being who dwelled among people and was known to them. She's gone now, her body rotting on the nightmare shore, her child raging in its grief, her people haunting the village where she lived. But her name is still being spoken in nightmares and in prayers, by hunters who have done terrible things and are reaching desperately for something like absolution. The orphan is not technically a named Great One in the same category as the others, but it is a Great One, and its story is so bound up in Kos's that treating them separately would be false. When you fight the Orphan of Kos, at the end of the hunter's nightmare on the shore where Kos's great body lies rotting, it emerges from its mother's wound with a sound that is less a roar than a scream, a birth cry without birth, an arrival without a beginning. It holds in one hand the placenta it emerged with, swinging it like a weapon, because it has nothing else. It has been in the nightmare since the scholars opened its mother and left it there, and it has had nothing to work with except grief. The orphan's attacks are not the controlled, purposeful movements of a creature that has learned to fight. They are flailing, desperate, the physical expression of pure trauma. It screams constantly. It falls to its knees at the end of the fight and looks out at the ocean where its mother once lived, and the game tells you nightmare slain. You do not feel triumphant. You cannot feel triumphant about this fight. The orphan is not evil. It is not a villain. It is a child who was born into a nightmare and has never known anything else, fighting the hunter who has come to end it not out of malice, but out of survival, out of the only response it has ever learned. When it dies, the game tells us it is released from the nightmare, freed to the cosmos. Whether this constitutes the end of the orphan's suffering or a continuation of it in a different form is not stated. What is stated is that the nightmare itself was nightmare slain, that the curse Kos set in motion was concluded here. Whether Kos receives that conclusion as justice, as closure, or whether she is simply gone and the conclusion means nothing to anyone but the hunters who can now leave. This is the space the game leaves for you to sit with. The orphan's cry is one of the sounds you carry out of Bloodborne, if you have fought it. It stays with you the way that certain sounds stay with you, not because they are the loudest, but because they are the truest. We have been circling this one, you felt it. Now we arrive. The moon presence is the last great one you face in the game, and it is the one who has been closest to you throughout the entire journey without your knowing it. It is the architect of the hunter's dream. It is the reason Gehrman sits in his wheelchair, withered and patient, giving you weapons and advice with the exhausted gentleness of someone who has done this many times before, who knows how it ends, who wants to spare you the worst version of that ending but cannot force you to accept the mercy he offers. It is called Flora of the Moon, of the Dream, by the doll. This name, Flora, is feminine, associated with flowers, with growth, with this cyclical renewal of life. There is something almost tender in the doll's use of it, as though she is describing someone she knows and perhaps even feels something for, rather than the cosmic entity of incomprehensible power that the moon presence actually is. In form, the moon presence is dissonant, where Ebrietas is massive and alien, where Amygdala is spindly and many-armed. The moon presence is assembled from human parts. It has a spine, it has ribs, it has limbs that echo the human, but elongated and multiplied and wrong, in ways that suggest a sculptor who started with humanity and then decided that was too small. Where its face should be is a void filled with tentacles that, from a distance, read as hair. It is built from the bones of humanity and shaped into something that is no longer human in any way that matters. It descended from the blood moon, or it is the blood moon, or it is what lives inside the blood moon, when Gehrman first made contact with it. The exact circumstances of that first meeting are obscured, but we know the broad outlines. Gehrman, grieving the loss of his student, and perhaps the love of his life, Lady Maria, made something. He made a doll in her likeness. He used a fragment of an umbilical cord and a piece of the biological connection to a great one, to reach out into the cosmos, hoping to animate the doll or simply to make contact with something greater than his grief. The moon presence answered, and it bound Gehrman to the hunter's dream in an arrangement that gave him exactly what he asked for. He was not alone. The doll lived in a sense. The dream was real, while taking from him everything else: his freedom, his age, his chance to die and be released. The moon presence's purpose in creating the hunter's dream is a matter of significant debate among Bloodborne scholars. The most supported interpretation is this: the moon presence was using the dream, and through it the hunters, to eliminate the other great ones. By binding increasingly powerful hunters to a cycle of dying and returning, growing stronger through accumulated combat, the Moon Presence was cultivating weapons, beings capable of reaching and destroying Great Ones that the Moon Presence itself, for reasons unknown, could not or would not directly confront. The note found in the lecture hall confirms this, a message indicating that the Moon Presence is actively seeking to eliminate other Great Ones. The pattern of the game's mandatory progression takes the player through encounters that are, in sequence, the elimination of Great Ones and their proxies, Rom, whose death ends the Veil, Mikolash, whose death ends the Mensis ritual, Mergo's wet nurse, whose death silences Mergo's cry and satisfies the hunt's immediate purpose. When Mergo's cry stops, the hunter's dream begins to burn. The hunt is over. The Moon Presence got what it wanted, and Gehrman, faithful to the last, offers the hunter the mercy of release, the chance to wake up in the real Yharnam, to walk away with no memory of the dream, to live a normal life. But this is the Moon Presence's mercy, filtered through Gehrman, not quite benevolent, not quite sinister. It is what you do with something that has served its purpose. You offer to release it, and if it accepts, you release it. If it does not accept, if the hunter refuses, fights Gehrman, defeats the old man in the dream, then the Moon Presence descends itself and offers something else. Continuation. The hunter becomes the new Gehrman. The dream continues. Another cycle begins. The Moon Presence, in the second ending, does not even acknowledge that the hunter might be anything other than a new tool. It descends. It embraces. The screen goes white. When it returns, you are in the wheelchair. But if the hunter has consumed 3 fragments of umbilical cord, 3 pieces of the biological link between the mortal world and the Great Ones, something different happens. The cord fragments have altered the hunter's nature. They have given the hunter enough Great One essence that the Moon Presence's attempt to absorb and bind them fails. The hunter resists. The Moon Presence, surprised, attacks. The final fight is not what you expect from a final fight. The Moon Presence is not as mechanically challenging as Gehrman, who fought you just before it. It is fast and erratic, yes, and it has the ability to reduce the player's health to a single point, a power it needs time to recharge after using, but it does not hit with the weight of inevitability that Gehrman's burial blade carries. It fights like something that has been caught off guard, like something that assumed the outcome and finds itself confronting a hunter who didn't read the script. When it falls, the hunter transforms. The Great One essence from the umbilical cords, catalyzed by the hunter's accumulated insight and whatever it has become through the journey, completes a metamorphosis. The hunter becomes something small, pale, infant, helpless, and cosmic at once. The doll picks you up. She holds you gently in whatever new form you have taken. This being that was once a hunter and is now something none of the game's characters have a name for, she asks. Are you cold? She promises to care for you. The hunter's dream continues, but this time, the thing in the wheelchair is not a prisoner. This time, the thing in the wheelchair, or rather, in the doll's arms, is something that might, given enough time, change what the dream is for. Flora of the moon, of the dream. The Moon Presence created the dream to use hunters as weapons, and in the end, a hunter used the dream to become something that could unmake that use and begin again. Whether that is victory, or simply another iteration of a cycle that runs deeper than any individual Great One or any individual hunter, is the question Bloodborne leaves you with as the credits roll. The sky's lighter now, or it will be soon, or it never was. Time moves strangely in places like this. We have met them, one by one, the formless voice in the blood, older than any institution built around it, the abandoned daughter, kneeling in the dark with her grief, the vacuous scholar who gained eyes and became a veil, the fear brain clinging to cathedral walls, the children twisted into messengers, the rotten watching brain in the nightmare tower, the wailing infant in its empty crib, the shore god and the child of sorrow, and the architect of dreams who used hunters like instruments and was finally perhaps played by one instead. What do they mean altogether? What does it mean that Bloodborne chose these particular forms for its cosmic entities? Not evil gods, not hungry darkness, but grieving parents and abandoned children and lonely survivors, and the slow accumulation of consequences. I think it means something very specific about what the game is trying to say, about ambition and desire, and the terrible gap between what we reach for and what we receive. Every great one reaches for a child and loses it. Every human reaches for transcendence and is consumed by it. The cycle is not a punishment for wickedness. It is the natural result of desire operating in a universe that is simply too large to accommodate it without consequence. The healing church desired healing and created a play. The scholars desired knowledge and created atrocities. Gehrman desired to not be alone and created a prison. The Moon Presence desired something: children, dominance, the silence of rival great ones, and created a dream that may have finally slipped out of its control. The great ones are not a warning against desire itself. They are not the universe saying, "Want less." They are the universe demonstrating what happens when desire operates without adequate understanding of what it is reaching into. Master Willem said it plainly. Fear the old blood. Not because the old blood is evil, but because you do not understand what you are touching when you touch it. You do not know what you are waking when you wake it. And the price of finding out is not always paid by the person doing the reaching. The fishing hamlet villagers paid for the scholar's curiosity. The orphans in the healing church paid for the choir's ambition. The hunters in the hunter's nightmare pay forever for the atrocities committed in the name of progress. The children of the orphanage paid with their humanity so that scholars could reach for a contact that burned them out anyway. And yet there is something else running through the Great One's stories that I don't want us to miss. Something softer and stranger than the horror. They are sympathetic. This is not an easy thing to say about beings whose proximity causes madness, whose children's cries tear apart the minds of an entire scholarly society, whose gifts transform recipients into beasts or worse. But Bloodborne's designers made a choice when they built the Great Ones, and that choice was to make them legible. Not to make them human, they are not in any meaningful sense, but to give them a core emotional reality that maps onto something we recognize. They love their children, they lose them, they search for something to put in their place of that loss. Everything else follows from that. Ebrietas, who was left behind by her own kind and still tries to search the cosmos for them, still allows the healing church to commune with her, still kneels in grief over the remains of something she cared about. She is not evil. She is the embodiment of waiting, of hope deferred long enough to become something that looks like despair. Rom, who was given a gift she only partially received, who sits in her lake maintaining a veil that protects people she will never speak to from truths they could not survive. The most passive of all the great ones, doing the most ongoing good, asking nothing. Kos, who shared everything she had with the people who lived near her, and was rewarded for that generosity with violation and loss. The most human in her relatability, the most devastating in her story. And Mergo, the infant that was never truly born, whose crying fills the nightmare that grief built, who laughs when freed and then goes silent in a way that might be peace, or might be something else entirely. These beings, for all their strangeness and all their scale, are lonely, every single one of them. Oedon moves through the blood of a city that does not know his name, touching women in the night and hoping for a child that can survive. Ebrietas mourns in the dark. Rom watches from behind her veil. Amygdala clings to walls in a city that cannot see it. Mergo cries in a nightmare that it built from its own distress. Kos is dead on a shore where the tide still comes in and goes out over her body. The moon presence, last and largest, waits in its dream that it built from a man's grief, cycling through hunters, binding them and releasing them and binding new ones, waiting for the one that will finally be enough. None of them find what they are looking for. Not truly, not in a way that lasts. And yet the game does not end in pure despair. The third ending, the one that requires the most effort and the most insight and the deepest engagement with the lore, suggests that transformation is possible, that something can come out of the nightmare that is genuinely new, that the hunter, having understood enough of the Great One's nature to carry their essence without being destroyed by it, can become something that changes what these cycles produce. What that new Great One will do, this small, pale thing that was once a hunter, cradled in the doll's arms in the soft light of the dream's eternal twilight, we do not know. The game ends there. It trusts you to imagine it, or to not imagine it, to simply let the image be. The doll holding something promising to care for it. The dream continuing but different. The sun beginning to rise over a night that has been very long. In our own lives, we reach for things we do not fully understand. We touch blood, so to speak. We touch power, knowledge, connection, ambition. And we change in ways we did not anticipate. And the people nearest to us sometimes pay prices they did not agree to pay. This is not evil. It is the condition of being alive and wanting things and not knowing everything. What the Great Ones offer, if they offer anything at all, is the image of what it looks like when that reaching goes unchecked. When the desire for a child, for connection, for something that will last, becomes so large and so untempered that it swallows everything around it. When grief and longing, instead of being held and worked through, become architecture, nightmare architecture, dream architecture, the built environment of an unresolved loss. Fear the old blood, not because it cannot heal you, it can, not because it cannot elevate you, it might, but because you do not know, when you reach for it, what you are reaching into. You do not know what is listening, you do not know what will answer, and when something does answer, from the dark and the vast and the old, be careful what you ask for, be careful what you trade for it, be careful who pays the price if the bargain turns out to be different from what you understood. The Great Ones are out there, every one of them, grieving and waiting and watching from angles that do not have names. Tonight at least they are watching over you. Rest now, good hunter. The dream, and all the Great Ones in it, will be here when you wake. If you wake, sleep well. And if Nightfall lore has been a companion in the dark for you tonight, if this journey through the cosmos of Bloodborne has helped ease you into rest, I would be grateful for a subscription. These videos take many hours to research and write, and knowing they reach people in the dark, in the quiet at the end of long days makes every hour of that work feel worthwhile. If you found yourself drawn to one of the great ones more than the others, if Ebrietas' loneliness resonated, or if Kos's story left you thinking, or if the image of Oedon moving invisibly through everything, worshipped by a city that does not know his name, stayed with you in that particular way that Bloodborne images tend to stay with you, leave a comment and tell me. I read them all. The community that gathers in these comments is one of the best things about this channel, and the conversations there about lore and interpretation and what these stories mean are genuinely some of the richest I have anywhere. Future Nightfall. Lore videos will continue exploring the world of Bloodborne and the worlds adjacent to it. There are more stories to tell in Yharnam, the Chalice dungeons with their ancient civilizations, the Old Hunters DLC with its trapped and suffering warriors, the specific tragedies of individual characters like Mikolash and Alfred, and the various hunters whose stories intersect with the Great One's plans in ways we have only gestured at tonight. And beyond Yharnam, other worlds are waiting. But we will get to them in time. For now, rest. The hunt is over for tonight. Until next time, may the good blood guide your dreams.